Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final session of our Paving the Way for Responsible Business Conduct in the Decade of Action webinar series. My name is Daria Naglick, and I am the Senior Manager of Programs and Business Relations here at Global Compact Network Canada. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the land that we are meeting on today, as this is traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with the multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. With unprecedented disruptions in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, businesses now more than ever have to strengthen their commitments to the 4 pillars of the UN Global Compact's 10 principles. A principles-based approach to responsible business conduct, the 10 principles encourage companies to establish a culture of integrity and an ecosystem of inclusivity by embedding the 4 pillars into their strategies, policies, and procedures. By upholding and furthering commitments to human rights, labor rights, environmental protections, and anti-corruption, businesses are raising the bar, supporting people and the planet while enabling their businesses for long-term success. Today's session, Canada and Beyond, a principles-based approach to building back better, will look at Canada's continued commitment and further advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they've come to become known, to meet the 2030 agenda. The discussion will also explore how organizations can optimize their economic recovery through a principles-based approach, creating a sustainable and inclusive recovery locally and globally. Our panelists today will share their experiences and expertise, highlighting how Canada is supporting the adoption and implementation of the global goals and how businesses can leverage a principles-based approach to drive collective action and to unite businesses to build back better. I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have with us Chris Moran, Director General, Trade Portfolio Strategy and Coordination Bureau at Global Affairs Canada, Craig Ryan, Director, Sustainability and ESG, Business Development Bank of Canada, and Olivier Bouillon, Director, Sustainable Development Goals Unit, Employment and Social Development Canada. Thank you all for being here with us today. Please introduce yourselves and offer a few words and sharing with us a little bit about the work that you do. Chris, we would like to go with you first, if you can.
Thanks so much, Daria. So as you mentioned, I'm Chris Moran. I'm the Director General of Trade Portfolio Strategy and Coordination at Global Affairs Canada. That is a unit that is in our International Business Development branch, and we work with the Trade Commissioner Service to serve Canadian companies abroad. We provide them with market intel, and we help them understand the connections that they need to enter and succeed in new markets. One of our key activities from my shop is to support trade commissioners abroad in all of the work that they're doing to promote responsible business conduct, to promote Canada's commitments, and to ensure that they are understanding the risks and the opportunities for them in this area.
Thank you so much. Craig?
Hi, everybody. I'm Craig Ryan, the Director of Sustainability at the Business Development Bank of Canada. For those of you who don't know BDC, we are a federal commercial crown corporation that only does one thing, which is provide loans and advisory services and investments to real economy entrepreneurs across Canada, a great number of whom are also active overseas. The part of my role that I'll be speaking from today is the part that promotes a business planning tool for sustainability-minded entrepreneurs, of which there are huge numbers, and the link between this business planning tool and the SDGs. So I look forward to talking about that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Craig. And Olivier.
Thanks, Daria. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivier Bouillon. I'm the Director of the Sustainable Development Goals Unit at ESDC. First, I'd like to thank Global Compact Network for organizing this event today and for having me. My unit, the unit I'm directing, has been created in 2018 to lead the overall coordination of the 2030 agenda and its SDGs, in close collaboration, of course, with all other departments and agencies. And we've been mandated to develop a national strategy, a federal implementation implementation plan, monitor and report on activities related to the 2030 agenda, raise public awareness and of support of the 2030 agenda, foster new partnerships, networks to advance the SDG. And we also developed and administer the SDG funding program. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for those introductions. We're really happy to have you all with us today. We'd like to open up today's discussion with a question for the audience. Please take a moment to open up a new browser and join slido.com, where you can enter the code displayed on the screen and in the chat box. The code is R718. I'll give everyone a quick moment to do this, and we will be asking a few more questions via Slido throughout the session. So please keep this tab open throughout today's webinar. Now, okay, for our first Slido question, we'd like to ask, what is the biggest challenge faced by businesses in meeting the 2030 agenda? Is it A, rebounding from the disruption of COVID-19, B, alignment with the Paris agenda and the 2030 agenda, C, improving gender equality, diversity, and inclusion, D, the implementation of climate change mitigation and adaptation, E, sustainable procurement and protecting human rights in supply chains, F, combating corruption and strengthening corporate governance practices, or G, ensuring decent work opportunities and fair wages for all employees and workers throughout the value chain. Okay, we'll just give everyone a few moments to enter their answers. Okay, it's great to see everyone participating. Okay, we'll just give another 15 seconds. Okay, thank you everyone for participating and for sharing your thoughts with us. It looks like we have a clear winner with the implementation of climate change and mitigation and adaptation. Okay, so to begin our discussion, I'd like to start with you, Olivier. What is the role of the Canadian government in advancing the global goals, and how is the government incorporating the SDGs in its recovery strategy for COVID-19?
Thank you, Daria. It's a very good question. So as I mentioned earlier, the SDG unit within the SDC has been mandated to lead the Government of Canada domestic implementation of the 2030 agenda in close collaboration with all other departments. And the international aspect of the implementation is led by our colleagues at Global Affairs Canada. Of course, and needless to say, the 2030 agenda is a shared responsibility that requires a whole of government and a whole of society efforts. Collaborative partnerships are fundamental to achieving those goals. This is why my team, with the support of more than 20 federal departments and external partners and stakeholders, has developed Canada's national strategy moving forwards together, which was released this February. The objective of the national strategy is to create and foster an enabling environment for ongoing collaboration, participation, dialogue, and whole of society collaboration with 17 SDG. It gives broad directions and identifies some key actions to help realize the agenda together, but under federal leadership. To complement the national strategy and articulate how the federal government will contribute to advancing the national strategy itself, we recently released during the UN High-Level Political Forum this past July, Canada's Federal Implementation Plan. This federal implementation plan that we effectively call the FIP establishes lead departments and agencies for each SDGs, as well as leads for various cross-cutting objectives, such as leaving no one behind, advancing reconciliation with Indigenous people, and ensuring coherence with Canada's international efforts. These leads, identified through their mandates, initiatives, program, level of contribution under each SDG, will support progress for all of the 17 SDGs. The document notably identifies various avenues for cooperation between the federal government, stakeholders, and partners. It also commits to reporting annually to Canadians on progress towards implementing the 2030 Agenda and advancing the 17 SDGs. To support domestic monitoring, reporting, and measuring progress on the SDG, we have developed, with the support of Statistics Canada, the Canadian Indicator Framework, which is an adaptation of the UN Global Indicator Framework, and which is more relevant to the Canadian context. I should note that Statistics Canada is leading the collection, the compilation, and reporting of statistical data. Statistics Canada hosts the SDG Data Hub to report on Canada's progress against the GIF, the Global Indicator Framework, which is updated as new data becomes available. It also hosts the Canadian Indicator Framework, which also is updated annually as data becomes available. An updated version of the SIF with revised targets, objectives, and data was released by Stats Canada last June. June 22nd, if I remember correctly. As highlighted in the FIP, in the Federal Implementation Plan, the federal government will also advance the 2030 Agenda and the SDG through its SDG funding program. This program is a grant and contribution program that commits $4.6 million annually over 13 years to support the government commitment to delivering on a whole society approach to the 2030 Agenda. It supports and leverages the work of external stakeholders, including the private sector, to deliver improved outcomes for Canadians with the aim of leaving no one behind, of course. To date, 127 projects have received funding under the program for a total of about $22 million. In addition, we are supporting national indigenous organizations by providing $300,000 a year over 3 years until 2023 to advance awareness on the 2030 Agenda among Indigenous communities and identify and address opportunities to contribute to Canada's effort to meet the 2030 Agenda in a way that supports their own priorities. Last, I should also note that work is underway to establish an external advisory committee composed of representatives of different segments of society, including the private sector, to provide expert advice on implementing the SDG. So through this work and through the Federal Implementation Plan, federal departments are linking their work and notably their efforts to build back better to the SDG in their annual departmental plans. Those plans are published every year by each of the more than 100 departments and agencies, and we can find direct linkages between their work, their priority, their mandates, their coming actions, and the SDGs and the indicators supporting documentation of the SDG. Through this work and the Federal Implementation Plan, we will not only guarantee that the current efforts conducted by the government are directly linked to the SDGs in the long term, not just in an electoral cycle, but it will also support policy coherence and ensuring that new programs and initiatives support progress until 2030 on each of the 17 SDGs. I'll stop there. And,
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olivier, for providing that in-depth overview and for getting us started. I just want to ask you for the next questions, if you could just speak more directly into your mic. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear you really thoroughly. Okay. It might have been a little unclear at some points, but I think you started us off great, and thank you so much for providing those insights. Wonderful. So moving on, I'd like to ask Craig. We know that SMEs and entrepreneurs make up the bulk of the Canadian economy. How is the Business Development Bank of Canada mobilizing the SDGs to catalyze a sustainable and inclusive recovery for these organizations? And what can larger organizations do to support SMEs and entrepreneurs?
Certainly, a great question. And the advantage of a dorky looking headset is usually better sound quality. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Yeah, so it's funny, Daria, when I reviewed the questions recently and its introduction as a principle-based approach, I am immersed in a socio-cultural movement of entrepreneurs that makes me instantly view the word principles as not the list in the international charter, but the personal motivations of all the entrepreneurs that I meet. And in our question, how are we mobilizing the SDGs to catalyze an inclusive and greener recovery? It's more accurate to say, and this is something that I'm if you're like me, you'll find it to be very confidence-giving. What we're actually doing at BDC is surfing a wave, a socio-cultural movement of entrepreneurs, far more numerous than us and much bigger than us, who are motivated by these same things and who are happily or delighted to learn that there are also international charters that list them out, but who have built their businesses that way. And this can sometimes surprise people because in much of our world, we've taken to talking about businesses as in the abstraction of a company that has to be instrumentalized to reach a goal. But it's far more accurate and far more powerful to see them for what they are, which is thousands and thousands of people whose greatest pride comes from building a company that makes where they live a better place to live, who are proud of the livelihoods that are inclusive that they create, who would balk at the suggestion that their operation pollute. And we are helping build a national network, if you will, of entrepreneurs who think like this by promoting a tool called B Corp. B Corp stands for Certified Beneficial Corporation. It's built by entrepreneurs. It's a planning tool. It's hard to achieve as a certification, but it is much broader than the other kinds on the marketplace, and it has a direct link with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, how should I say it? Most entrepreneurs are not saddled by degrees in economics. They've never heard of Milton Friedman. They're disappointed to learn that he's dead because they would like to give him a whack across the back of the head for his ridiculous formula. They don't run their businesses that way, and they don't care that they never hear about that in pop culture or the news or on economics reports. But let me tell you and everybody listening today that we at BDC have put our finger onto something that is big and powerful and doesn't need to be instrumentalized. It's probably several steps ahead of both of us. And these companies are as robust, as profitable as any conventional company. They are in every sector of the economy. They come in every size, and they come in every place. I can fill airport hangars with real live entrepreneurs who are Canadian, who live the SDGs, even if they've never heard of them. And that's what I'd like to bring today to ensure that everybody knows, because there is a socio-cultural movement of principled people who are helping build the inclusive, greener future that we all need. And in response to the question, what can larger organizations do to support them? The question I would ask is, because what I usually see in the marketplace is not SMEs needing support. I see SMEs innovating and changing, and then running into conventional attitudes within the minds of investors and larger corporations that frustrate them. What does happen, a recognizable dynamic, when larger corporations decide to act more sustainably or find themselves obliged to act more sustainably, then everything in their supply chains receives a signal and a pressure. That's one of the ways that some SMEs encounter the pressure to be more sustainable. But how shall I say it? It's not for the larger companies to help the SMEs. The SMEs have it quite in hand, thank you very much. And I see them as a more vibrant, stronger force already.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Craig. Thank you for highlighting your great work in support of entrepreneurs and the SMEs. Chris, I'd like to ask you, with 2030 less than 9 years away, how is Global Affairs Canada prioritizing the principles of sustainability with respect to responsible business conduct? Where is Canada excelling, and where are the future opportunities for Canada to take a leading role?
Thanks, Daria. I like Craig, I have a lot to say on this issue, and I think one of the things that I would echo, with a full-throated agreement, is the fact that SMEs actually have a very good news story to tell. I think what we're seeing, and frankly, I think one of the areas that all of us could do more is in this research space and understanding this. So not just on the B Corp side, but looking at the role that SMEs play and the leverage that they have in supply chains, and also looking at the features of entrepreneurs that make them successful. So SMEs are headed up by entrepreneurs usually, and that innovation and that nimble ability makes them more responsive to market signals and makes them actually, Craig, I forget how you put it, but well-meaning and principled. And I think that that's a really important factor to draw out in this conversation, is that SMEs, by and large, actually have some advantages in this space. So that's not the question that you've asked me, but because we are in the Trade Commissioner Service and we work so closely with SMEs, this is something that we are observing, and we see a lot of goodwill, we see a lot of interest, and I think that that is, it's one of Canada's best assets, in fact, is the fact that we have these conversations with companies. And I think that this is an open discussion. So just having said that, I also want to underscore what Olivier said, where there's a role, a distinct role for each department to play. And I am heartened to know that there is actually one focal point in his department, because this issue is so broad and it touches on so many issues. And within global affairs, even, we have folks working on environment and climate change, working on human rights, working on trade promotion and inclusive trade. There's a distinct role for each department to play. And at Global Affairs Canada, we recognize that, and we are starting to have, I think, a more coherent approach to this, because the North Star has always been there. But one of the things that has really allowed us to perform better is the coalescing of that energy. And so the SDGs really give us a focal point as well. This issue, responsible business conduct, is certainly at the crosswalk of many priorities for Canada. Both of my colleagues have underlined that: respect for human rights, taking action on climate change, inclusive trade, upholding the rights of Indigenous people, and certainly amplifying our feminist international assistance policy. But we also have started to look at, within the economic sphere, how it actually how adopting RBC principles, which align to the SDGs, can help make a company more resilient, gives them better awareness of their production and supply chain risks, all of those risks, by the way, not just the operational, but also financial and legal risks. And it really looks at putting a focus on the prevention and mitigation of problems before they occur, making sure that there are scenarios in place to address those identified risks. And that is an important shift that we've started to have in our conversation with Canadian companies, because we've broadened it, where we're looking at a much more coherent and cohesive whole of mission approach. So of course, at Global Affairs Canada, one of our roles is to be in other countries, a voice for Canada representing Canadian interests. And on the Trade Commissioner Service side, we're working with Canadian companies in those markets. So ensuring that we're having that collaborative discussion with our peers on the foreign policy side, as well as on the development side, has really helped us to do that. As I noted, we have this balanced approach to responsible business conduct. So we're promoting and advocating, at the same time offering conflict resolution in key areas. We used to say that we have a fully voluntary approach because our dispute settlement and conflict resolution is a voluntary approach. But in fact, over the past year or so, we've really come to realize just how many of our commitments are backed up by regulatory policies or law. So for example, these are important steps that we've taken. Canada has made amendments to the customs tariff, which makes it illegal to import products of forced labor. That's a really important thing. We have transparency measure in the ESTMA. We have the integrity regime in our procurement efforts. These are all really important factors, and I want to underscore that they are echoed in our trade promotion efforts. I think the past year has certainly created a heightened awareness of risk, and companies had a major seismic shift in their operations, and those that had RBC assessment policies and mitigation strategies in place have fared better. So we saw that companies who had already started thinking about this were able to identify a solution and keep moving through their supply chain. They knew what they were going to do. They were more agile so that they could keep their operations running, secure protective equipment, and implement the safety measures that they needed to protect their employees, communities, and clients. And I think that agility is something that we see as being essential to maintain as we're moving in the post-pandemic economy. So we've been consulting on a new RBC strategy, and we are working towards integrating a lot of what we've learned over the last little while into that. I think that where we're doing well is in innovation in the space. So in particular, we've had two strategies on responsible business conduct. It was really focused on the extractive sector, and we've seen a lot of innovation there. We've seen the mining sector come up with the Towards Sustainable Mining, which they are continuing to promote globally, but we're seeing other activities in other sectors, and we're really pleased to have those conversations, because it does mean that the word is getting out, and that appreciation and understanding of the risks and the opportunity that it presents for companies is there. It's in the Canadian economy. The Trade Commissioner Service, as I've noted, we're in the International Business Development branch, and so we're working with companies every day. RBC has really emerged as a cornerstone of our work, and we're looking at integrating it into all of our conversations. We have offered extensive training to trade commissioners to ensure that they are well versed in these issues. We are having the conversations about how we can do better in actually offering this as an additional service for our companies. And then we've also adopted policies which will help us to promote these, really put our money where our mouth is, and promote these policies, promote the expectation that we have of Canadian companies. So for example, we have adopted an integrity declaration, which is really aimed at ensuring that companies are committing in a meaningful way to behave according to Canadian law and Canadian government expectations. So it confirms that the company knows what is expected of them, that it adheres to Canadian law and the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act, the CFPOA, which makes it illegal to offer a facilitation payment. And we have also taken advantage of the opportunities that we have as Canada and as an honest broker to bring parties together in market to start to have those conversations. So we have offered support to Canadian missions abroad to bring stakeholders, companies, and Canadian exporters together to have these conversations. And it's often sort of demystified the conversation. It's lent some credence to stakeholders' concerns so that the companies on the ground see that this is something that the Canadian government cares about if we're hosting an event related to it. And that has actually yielded some very interesting results in terms of in-market awareness and in-market deliverables. So we have been able to do more than 400 of these types of events, and that's over the last 20 years. But I think that those are really important conversations to foster. In terms of the opportunities for us, this is something that we consider all the time, and in a trade promotion branch, we are always looking at Canadian capacity. I see that some of that Canadian capacity brings with it some very interesting opportunities for us, especially in the information technology. So we see that there are opportunities in technologies like blockchain to support supply chain due diligence, to support traceability, and all of the things that need to be there in order to have that traceability. The pandemic has really forced us to pause on a lot of things, and I see this as a big opportunity for us. We can consider new ways of doing business and new ways of incorporating RBC principles as we scale back up. Canada is obviously engaged in discussions at the multilateral level. So right now, for example, we're gearing up to the UN climate meeting in Glasgow. The OECD, of which we are an active member, is reviewing its guidelines, and we continue to bring the Canadian voice to bear and bring the Canadian experience to bear. But I think that there's a lot that we're still doing at home and opportunities for us there. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing those thoughts and insights with us. Really appreciate it. Okay, I'd like to move on to our next question, and this will be a question I share with all three speakers. So I'd like to begin with you, Olivier. From your organization's perspective, what are Canada's economic priorities for sustainable development, domestically or internationally?
Thank you. So I'm trying to speak closer to the mic. Is it better?
Yes, that's fantastic.
Excellent. So it's a bit of a difficult question because from where I stand, where I have to promote all 17 SDGs, and they are not all born equal, but they are all very important. We at ESDC, we're still the lead. I mentioned under the national strategy, we have identified leads for each of the 17 SDGs that will help conduct progress. At ESDC, we're actually the lead for 4 of those 17 SDGs. And so I will take an example from covering those SDGs, and we're responsible for SDG 1, 4, 8, and 10. One of the big commitment, of course, of the government is to improve economic well-being for all Canadians so that everybody has a real and fair chance to succeed. So it is also in the spirit of leaving no one behind. And what we've seen is the pandemic had exposed significant gaps and challenges related to the care economy. So, and this is a very interesting example that again confirm how interconnected all SDGs can be, and that some initiatives, very horizontal, can actually help all segments of society, and including SMEs. So the one I wanted to flag was the one related to the care economy. As we all know, limited access to affordable and high quality early learning and childcare not only impact the children's future outcome, but also women's social and economic quality, and it impacts our economic well-being as a whole and our capacity as a country to move forward. So that's why, for example, the government and our department, ESDC, is making transformative investments in the care economy, up to like 30 billion over the next 5 years. And we will be investing up to $9.2 billion through the ongoing budget, as it was announced in 2021, to build a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. And I think those examples, those initiatives are very fundamental because not only they help build future generation, reinforce capacity of future generation to be better integrated to society, but it's also free a big chunk of our productive forces, namely the women who are often the one taking care of children. And it's through those initiatives that we can actually achieve a number of goals, reducing poverty, for example, through access to work. A mom that doesn't have to just take care of her children, but can actually rely on daycare and find work, can contribute to the economy. It can provide new resources to SMEs. Often very talented people cannot work because they have to do this. So I thought it was a very good example of some maybe less known initiatives or things that we don't echo maybe enough, but have very tremendous impact on all levels of society, not just the young generation, but also most importantly of women, who are unfortunately some of the segment of population that are left behind. So I thought that was a good initiative under ESDC that I wanted to flag. Could have picked the poverty reduction strategy, a very important, of course, initiative. But I thought that one would be might be more interesting to discuss because it's again improving gender equality, education, it's alleviating poverty, and it's reinforcing available pool of labor, often very qualified labor for SMEs. So that's the one I wanted to flag here. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivier, for sharing those examples with us. Craig, I'd like to pose the same question to you. What are Canada's economic priorities for sustainable development domestically or internationally, according to your organization's perspective?
Yes, from BDC's perspective, there would be 2. Prosperity that's more inclusive and the climate crisis. Now, part of me feels a little like I'm cheating in answering that question so neatly because inside inclusive prosperity, there are lots of challenges and lots of dimensions and lots of experimentation to help. And alongside responses to the climate crisis, there are a great many entrepreneurs who are creating environmental value with companies that are not specifically speaking climate. But to speak about them quickly, each in turn, when we look around the world, what we see is democracies destabilized. And one of the sources of destabilization is parts of the population that are frustrated and expressing frustration and anger. The root of democratic instability is usually inequality. And so even in a relatively fortunate country like Canada, there is always work to be continually done. And so what we see when we look at entrepreneurs creating prosperity, we see them creating it in ways that are inclusive in different ways. So we support, for example, Indigenous entrepreneurs, both directly and indirectly. And one of the things that will help those societies advance, improve, is when their entrepreneurs succeed. It can take a broader form or geographic form as well. We see entrepreneurs creating, if you hear a doorbell ringing, forgive me, that's mine. I'll ignore it. Territorial form. So there are parts of the country in which the feeling of economic belonging are less than in others. We support entrepreneurs creating that economic belonging across the country. And even in fortunate countries like Canada, that continued work is really, really important in basic ways and in newer ways that the public mind is recently opening itself up to understand, by which I mean communities or pockets of the population that have not enjoyed access to our institutions and success in ways that others have. When we look at the climate crisis, this horrific summer thus far and the IPCC report of this week make it clearer than it ever has been that we're on code red, folks, and we have to act. And most SMEs, however, are not, as humans, as citizens, they feel that same call. As business people, most of them don't yet, because the 98% of the companies in Canada that are SMEs are only responsible for about a third of the GHGs, and they are not yet the object of government or investor attention to get those GHGs down. What we do see, though, and I'll end on this point, which again is another example of how when we look to real people in society, we can see things that give us great inspiration and confidence. We, BDC, recently did a poll of entrepreneurs across Canada, and we asked them, do you do anything with your business to create economic, environmental value, right, of any kind? And the response was yes, 82% of them do. So 82% of Canadian entrepreneurs do things in and with their companies to create a kind of environmental value, be it a pollution reduction issue or manage water better. When we ask them the next question, which is why, why do you do that? Most people expect the classic market signals to have played an interest, and I am pleased to report that we were all wrong, and that the lead motivator for all of these actions is personal conviction. By a country mile, the biggest motivator, 62%, said, no, the reason I do that is because that's how I define success. And so that is a much better, more solid basis upon which to build a positive movement, to introduce people to those things called the Sdgs, and to build the future we need.
Thank you so much, Craig.
My
Chris,
pleasure.
I'd like to ask you the same question. What are Canada's economic priorities for sustainable development domestically and or internationally, according to Global Affairs Canada?
Well, that's a hard one to answer because I can't speak on behalf of all of Global Affairs. We're such a big organization. What I can speak to is the Trade Commissioner Service, and to pick up on things that Olivier and Craig have both said, it's such a multifaceted issue that I agree wholeheartedly with everything they've said, and I would probably echo it. As part of the challenge of going last is really that I agree fully with what Craig said and about the role of personal conviction, about the ability that we have to effect some change on the environment, and with what Olivier said about that inequity piece. So this is a really big issue. I can't really choose one priority. It's sort of like asking someone to choose their favorite child. What we can say is that there are things that we're doing that I think are going to make differences across the board. So inclusive trade is a really big priority for us. And so we're looking at how we, as a government, serve Canadian companies that have additional challenges, that are equity deserving. And that's at the heart of that inclusive trade piece. We're addressing, in collaboration, in fact, with Craig's organization and others, some of the inequities that face women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs that are owned by persons of color, lesbian, gay, bisexual entrepreneurs across the board. And we're looking at the additional supports that they need, because we know that that inclusive trade agenda is important, not just to Canada, not just to those entrepreneurs from a fairness perspective, but ensuring that there's broader support for our economic activity generally, but also from a principles-based, in terms of ensuring that trade does have benefits across the board. I'd also note just the emphasis on the opportunity that meeting the SDGs presents. And my colleagues who work on clean tech see that this is a tremendous opportunity for the excellent technology that we have developed here in Canada. And that is something that, depending on who you speak to within the Trade Commissioner Service, that would probably be cited as an important element as well. For me, because I am at this at the crossroads of so many of these issues, it's really difficult for me to pick because I see them all so intertwined. But I look at this through the lens of our feminist international assistance policy and what that means for inclusion, what that means for environmental sustainability and human rights. And I see that Canadian companies have a very important role to play. So I can't pick one. What I can say is that I think that there's a great opportunity before us, and I am very, very pleased that the Trade Commissioner Service has been making strides in this area, that we are, I think, being recognized as doing that, and that I think Canadian companies increasingly are engaging with us on this issue, that they see us as more than market intel and network building, that they're seeing us as an important source of information. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Daria.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate your answer. I'd like to now ask the audience to return to their Slido browser for our second and final Slido question. In your opinion, what SDG or SDGs require the most action and urgent attention from the private sector? We've listed all 17 here for you. So if you could just please select your top 3, that would be great. Please do not select more than 3, and we'll see which of the 17 come out as the top priorities. We'll give everybody about 20 seconds to respond. We'll wait a few more seconds. Okay, so I think we have our top 3. Thank you everyone for participating. It's great to see your answers come through, and it would be wonderful to hear what our panelists think of these answers as well. Craig, let's begin with you. Do you agree with these suggestions? And based on these priorities, what actions can the private sector do to help build resiliency and make progress in these key areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption?
Yes, I agree with them. What I'll do is share what we have learned are the prime motivations of Canada's SME sustainability leaders. So the B Corp movement, that we know a lot. We know them all actually, as a national movement. We learned in early days that it wasn't a green movement. People expected it to be a bunch of climate obsessives hugging trees, but it's not that. 70 to 80% of them are mostly motivated by that desire to have their company's success make where they live a better place to live. So it's decent work, it's no poverty, it's the inclusive prosperity component. So that's the prime motivation for most of these SMEs and maybe most people. A smaller second group of about 20% were driven mostly by climate. And that may reflect, as I said, the fact that SMEs are not the object of public policy attention or investor attention because they're not responsible for most of the GHGs. But remember, SMEs are 98% of the economy. They're not just the roots of the economy, they're the roots, they're the trunk, they're every single branch except the tip of one. And the large companies that are responsible for the big footprint are, you can put them on one Excel spreadsheet probably. Yeah, so I would predict that if governments continue down the paths that they look to be forging, which is more assertive actions to trigger the systemic change in the economy that we need to do that energy transition, that will inevitably, fairly quickly ricochet or have a ripple effect into the SME world. Some sectors, of course, before others. But I would hesitate to give any other advice that's directive toward what is a powerful grassroots, self-motivated, very successful movement, which is people wanting to create inclusive prosperity across Canada. I would step back and applaud rather than try to direct it.
No, I appreciate that insight. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with us. No, that's wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Craig. Chris, I'd like to ask the same question of you. Do you agree with these suggestions? And Steve, if we can just put them back up for everyone to see the Slido questions and answers that we received. So just based on these priorities, what actions can the private sector do to help build resiliency and make progress in the key areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption? Chris, sorry, I just want to make sure you can still hear me.
Oh, excuse me, I was on mute. You'd think a year in we would not still have that challenge. So when you look at the various goals, they're so intertwined, and climate action is going to lead to better health outcomes and more sustainable cities and communities. So it's hard to disagree with any of it. I believe that there is a role for Canadian companies to play on all of these, and I think that Canadian companies do recognize that. Economic development is only achieved through economic activity. And so we are seeing, coupled with our development assistance, we're seeing a lot of focus being placed on key areas. And I'm heartened to know of the conversations that are taking place and to see the innovations and the commitment that exists on the part of Canadian companies. The curiosity, the engagement, and the very, very meaningful commitments that are actually starting to take hold and show fruit. I think that the SDGs are going to dominate the conversation in economic relationships for a long time. They have, they are, first of all, so well understood in many ways, although they are very complex. They're also very simple to understand when you look at them. But it's difficult to extract climate action from many of the others. Affordable and clean energy is really important. Canadian companies have a tremendous capacity, competence, and innovation there, and that's going to lead to, I think, more sustainable cities and communities, et cetera. So it's really a nexus. I think that climate action obviously is very important, and we are seeing some of the early steps there. We're seeing already with BDC taking steps in that area. We've seen EDC make commitments in that area. Canada itself has made commitments, and so I think those are all areas that we want to continue to uphold and do our part to support the economic activity and exporters in that way. Daria, now you're still on mute. Sorry.
My apologies. I think I clicked it and it just, my mouse slid off, so I didn't click it correctly. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing those insights with us. Olivier, do you agree with these suggestions? And based on these priorities, what actions can the private sector do to help build resiliency and make progress in these key areas?
Thanks, Aya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I might take a more iconoclast position on that question than my two colleagues. I completely agree with the choice. It's very difficult to rank importance of SDGs. There is a debate among the community as is the SDG 1, poverty reduction, the mother of all SDGs, and by solving poverty, we are solving a lot of the issues we are facing, global issues. What I would like to flag, though, it's 20 years ago at the Earth Summit in Stockholm, a European president said that now famous sentence, our planet is burning, our house is burning, and we're looking somewhere else. It was 20 years ago. It's been 50 years since the first Earth Summit. And that sentence could not be any more true today than it was 20 years ago. We see it literally, the Earth is burning, our house is burning. Over the last 20 years, we've made a lot of progress in our thinking, and we've moved from a very environmental focus to a more social focus and to sustainable development, which is great. And we've been able to achieve a lot of most needed progress on the social front. We talk a lot of diversity, inclusion, so on and so forth, which is very fundamental issues for us to discuss. But that being said, we need a place to live. We are one species, well, at times a very selfish species. And we are maybe missing a boat. That is, we are been taking the environment for granted for too long. All our actions have a cost. This public good that is the environment doesn't come for free. We've been using it, abusing it, and as we know, we are consuming our total amount of resources within a few months, within half a year. And the bill that we're going to pass on to future generations, to our kids, it's getting heftier and heftier. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing about inclusion. In the contrary, I'm living and breathing inclusion. But do we want to die equal, or do we want to continue living as a species? And environment has to be taken very seriously at this point. We know through the reports that if we start taking very crucial actions today, it will take up to 50 years for them to have an impact environmentally. We know, I had that discussion with my daughter. She's 16. I said, if we do all those things, you will leave the impact by the time you are in your 60s. And your children will live into the climate we're giving to you. So in a way, I could not agree more that, unfortunately, it is time to wake up and to take the environment not for granted. And so if I had one call to make, it's really that we integrate environment and environmental constraint way more into our thinking. And for entrepreneurs, I'm very delighted to know that they are doing that because they think it's the right thing to do. But as Craig said, it's a handful sometimes of corporation, and it's our action that is really leading the charge of us over-consuming, us not maybe living within our means. And while we are doing tremendous progress on creating an equal world for all of us, sometimes we might be missing some of the important element is that we need a place to live, and that place is not doing very well today. So for me, I could not agree more that despite all the importance and the tremendous needs to have a balanced growth, to have an inclusive growth, we still need the place to generate that growth. So that's why I would very much agree that the climate change might be one of the most pressing issues we're facing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivier. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists if in 1 minute you can let us know what makes you hopeful or optimistic about Canada's future in terms of sustainable development. So Olivier, let's begin with you.
I'll be short. I think the pandemic taught us a tremendous lesson. Faced with very big challenges, we've been able to pull through. We're still alive. A year ago, like everybody was very afraid that all those terror movies were actually happening and becoming the truth. And we've realized by putting our efforts in the right place and our mind to the right things, we've been able to pull through. We're not out of the woods yet, but at least the crisis taught us that we can tackle issues in a very, very positive way and find solutions. I think if we put our minds to the right issues, we might be also able to pull through. So it's maybe time to reorient our priorities. And that's the lesson learned from COVID, is that if we want, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you. Chris, what makes you hopeful or optimistic about Canada's future in terms of sustainable development?
There's so much. I often caution people to be careful what they wish for, because 20-year-old Chris would have loved to have this job. And it is such a challenge. And I often say that it's what keeps me up at night, but it also gets me out of bed in the morning. And I'm really heartened to see a very robust discussion on this. And I'm very heartened to see the fact that there is this commitment to moving the sticks forward, to actually engaging, and Canadian companies are at the forefront of economic relationships, and they understand what's at stake. They understand the difference that they can make. And I think that is really heartening. It makes me feel very optimistic, because they do have a lot of leverage in their relationships internationally. And what we're seeing is positive change. We're seeing a meaningful discussion, a meaningful uptake of principles and steps that actually lead to better outcomes on sustainability, on labor rights, on economic inclusion. And I think that that's that to me is very, very heartening. So I want to let Craig weigh in, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Chris. And yes, Craig, what makes you hopeful or optimistic about Canada's future in terms of sustainable development?
What makes me hopeful are a couple of things. One, the inspirational power of the people I described to you, those B Corp entrepreneurs and the many people like them. But on climate specifically, and I tend to agree with Olivier on this point. First things first, the house is on fire. When I look around, what I see is activists such as Greta have successfully cast the issue as one of intergenerational equity. And that is clearer in the public's mind right now. There is a vividness now to what climate change means every time we turn on our television sets. The number of people who contest the science has been reduced to really a fringe. We rarely see that in debate anymore. And in democracies, and Canada's a democracy, we see governments acting assertively to fix problems that are bigger than all of us. And when I see all of those things together, the Canadian public expecting more and a responsive government, then that gives me confidence in the future.
Thank you so much, Craig. And that wraps up our discussion for today. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you also to our wonderful panelists for your time today and your continued efforts in working to combat all of your priorities and work towards the inclusive and sustainable recovery that we're looking towards. I'd also like to invite everyone to visit our website or contact us at programs@globalcompact.com if you'd like to learn more about today's session. I'd also like to ask the panelists if you could please turn on your cameras and just help us take one screenshot so that we can have for our social media. Thank you everyone, however, for joining, and have a wonderful day. So the panelists, if you could just for 3 seconds. Wonderful. Thank you so much everyone for your time. We look forward to connecting again with you all soon. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
It's a real pleasure to meet you all.
Thanks so much, Daria.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.